When life silences you, it's time to show the world who you really are. I'm Lívia, I'm 29 years old, and until recently, I thought the biggest mistake of my life was expecting recognition from my family. I grew up being the daughter who didn't cause problems, who got good grades, who didn't talk back. I was always told I was too strong to need attention, and as much as it hurt, I accepted that for years. The truth is, my sister Nicole has always been the emotional center of the house. Anything was an excuse to protect her, spare her, hide the truth from her. Meanwhile, I became a repository of veiled criticism, absurd demands, and guilt disguised as advice. At the time it all happened, I was experiencing one of the happiest moments of my life. Igor had proposed, and we were planning a small but meaningful ceremony. I had just been promoted at work, our house was almost finished, and for the first time, I felt respected by someone. Igor looked at me as if I were important, and that for someone who grew up feeling invisible is almost a miracle. But that feeling was short-lived. When we told my family about the engagement, the reaction was lukewarm. No emotional hugs or contagious joy, just glances exchanged between my parents and the words, "We need to talk about this calmly." That conversation came days later. Sitting at the table in the house where I grew up, I heard my mother, Regina, say I should have a low-key wedding. According to her, Nicole was going through a very delicate emotional time, and a large ceremony could destabilize her. My father, Sergio, added that I knew how sensitive my sister was, and that a public event could seem provocative. In other words, my happiness needed to be hidden. Again, I was in shock. It was my wedding. It was the day I'd waited years for, and they were asking me to erase it from my life as if it were a favor. Worse, as if it were my obligation. At first, I tried to understand. I really did. I spent nights trying to convince myself I was overreacting, that maybe it was selfish of me to want a party. Igor told me I shouldn't accept that, but I was so used to putting myself aside that I no longer knew what was reasonable or not. I agreed with him that we would do something more private, but not out of fear of Nicole, but for us. But that choice was never respected. Regina, my mother, began demanding that I not post anything on social media, that I not wear a white dress, that the ceremony be, almost like an informal gathering. "It'll be beautiful either way," she said. But I knew. It wasn't for me. It was for the daughter who cried at every turn and was always listened to. Over time, I began to realize it wasn't just about the marriage. It was about everything I'd experienced with them. I remembered birthdays my mother didn't show up for because Nicole was sick. I remembered times I needed advice and only heard criticism. I remembered the day I passed away at college and there was no celebration because Nicole had been dumped by her boyfriend. I began to wonder when exactly my life became a burden to them. Was I never truly loved? Or was I just serving as the silent example that made Nicole seem even more special? The pain mounted. I cried in secret in the bathroom at work, masking my depression with makeup and telling Igor everything was fine. But it wasn't. I felt betrayed, alone, diminished. And the worst part was, no one in my family noticed. Or if they did, they pretended not to. The climax came when my mother showed up with a birthday invitation for Nicole. A huge party, complete with a DJ, a buffet, and over 100 guests. The same month as my wedding. That's when it hit me. It wasn't about sensitivity. It was about priorities. And I was never the priority. It was that day that something inside me snapped. I spent hours staring in the mirror, trying to understand what I was doing with my life. I was about to marry the man I loved, and yet I felt like I was in mourning. I mourned a family that never existed the way I imagined. For the first time, I began to consider the possibility of not inviting them, of doing something for myself, just for myself. I felt scared, of course. The guilt I'd been taught to carry since childhood weighed heavily, but I also felt something new, anger. An anger that wasn't destructive, but liberating. I decided I wasn't going to hide anymore. I spoke to Igor, and he was wonderful. He said he'd support me in whatever I decided. And it was there, sitting with him on the couch in our house, that I said out loud for the first time, "We're going to have the wedding we want, and if it hurts anyone, that's not our problem." That sentence was a turning point. I started planning everything again, every detail, but now with a different purpose. I didn't just want to get married. I wanted to rise up. I wanted to show that my story mattered, that I too deserved to be celebrated. The following days were a mixture of relief and anguish. I began planning the wedding alone, without having to answer to my family. It was a therapeutic process. Organizing every detail of the event gave me the feeling of regaining control of my life. At the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about their reactions. How would my mother and father react? Nicole, of course. But deep down, something inside me already knew. I was no longer afraid. That chronic fear of not being liked, of being rejected, of being left out, was finally going away. The day of the ceremony arrived. I was nervous, of course, but also strangely at peace. I no longer needed to wear the heavy makeup that usually hid my emotions. When I put on my dress, I felt a sense of freedom, as if I were taking off an old outfit and putting on a new one. Igor looked at me with a supportive smile and said, "You look stunning. Now it's only our story that matters." And in that moment, with him by my side, I understood that happiness doesn't require anyone's approval, only my own. At the altar, nervousness nearly paralyzed me. But when I saw the looks on everyone's faces, I realized something important. There was the person I'd always been, and no one could take that right away from me. The moment Igor and I said "I do" was a symbol of a liberation I never imagined I could achieve. It wasn't just a yes to marriage. It was a yes to my own voice, to my own happiness. And when, at the end, I turned to the guests, I felt a kind of profound relief. I had made my choice, and it was worthy of respect. A few minutes after the ceremony, my mother and father arrived. I was already expecting them. I don't know what was going through their minds, but I know they expected a confrontation. But I wasn't there to fight. When my mother approached me, she tried to hide her hurt, but her expression was clear. She didn't understand what I had done. And that was when something inside me broke completely. I no longer wanted their apologies, nor the explanations that never came. I just wanted to be happy. I finally understood what marriage symbolized for me. It was proof that, as much as I'd been forced to be a secondary figure throughout my life, I was now the protagonist of my own story. I looked at Nicole and realized that, as much as she was upset with my decision, the only person who needed to forgive me was myself. There's no point in trying to please others when in the end, no one truly sees you. That's what I learned that day. Igor took me by the hand and, without saying a word, led me to the table where our celebration began. Rather than a simple dinner, it was a genuine celebration of our love and freedom. Happiness was etched on my face, and for the first time in a long time, I knew that was enough. Love doesn't need the approval of those who don't understand you. True victory is knowing that you are capable of rising up and rebuilding yourself. What happened next was a series of small victories. My relationship with my mother and father was never the same, but at least I found the courage to set clear boundaries. I no longer wanted to be that daughter who accepted any scrap of love or attention. And finally, as the months passed, I realized that my story was unique, and it didn't need external validation to be valuable. Just doing what made me happy was enough. Finally, I understood that true power comes from within, and liberation lies in being who you are, without asking permission. When you put yourself first, it's not selfishness, it's self-respect. Today, looking back, I see that secret marriage wasn't just revenge against my family. It was my cry for freedom. And for the first time, I can say I'm in charge of my own life. Over time, I realized that not only had my relationship with my family changed, but so had the way I viewed myself. I became more assertive, more in control of my own choices. Each time I made decisions without fear of disappointing others, I felt I was getting closer to the woman I always wanted to be. It wasn't about being perfect or pleasing everyone. It was about being true to myself. And as simple as it seemed, this was the biggest transformation of all. Nicole, of course, still didn't understand, and perhaps never will. But I realized I was no longer willing to carry the burden of her insecurities. The relationship with her, which had always been toxic, became increasingly distant. Not because I abandoned her, but because I distanced myself from the pain she caused. My mother's harsh words, my father's judgmental looks, all of this began to carry less weight. I learned not to let their distorted vision of who I should be determine my worth. Happiness no longer depended on them. It depended on me. When I see Igor, who always supported and believed in me, I know I'm in good hands. But most of all, I know I'm in my own hands. I've learned to be my own hero, and it's been an incredible journey of self-discovery and freedom. I'm no longer afraid to be who I am, with all my flaws and strengths. I am enough. The days after the wedding were filled with small victories, freeing myself from the guilt I'd always carried, starting to make decisions without fear of judgment, reconnecting with myself and the things that truly matter. The love I feel for Igor was strengthened by this freedom, because now, more than ever, I knew my happiness was my choice. He was always by my side, but it was when I found myself that our love truly blossomed. As difficult as it was to get to this point, I'm proud of the woman I've become. Looking back, I see a version of myself who was trapped, afraid to assert herself, afraid to be who she was. Today, this woman who lived in the shadow of others' expectations has become someone who allows herself to shine, unafraid of overshadowing others in the process. I've learned that there's nothing wrong with being happy, nor with putting yourself first. Maybe my mother will never fully understand. Maybe my father still feels I made the wrong choice. But now, I understand that what matters is my peace. They have their own way of seeing the world, but I am the master of my own destiny. And, as difficult as it was, this achievement is something no one can take away from me. Not because the marriage itself was perfect, but because I was able to live my life the way I deserve to live it, with dignity, respect, and above all, happiness. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see someone who doesn't need anyone's approval to be happy. And it's not about arrogance, it's about self-love. I gave myself the right to be happy. I didn't need to ask for permission. And that was the greatest gift I could have given myself. The wedding wasn't just a celebration of love with Igor, but a celebration of a woman who finally learned to put herself first. What happened to me was more than overcoming. It was a rebirth. And every day, I remember that true strength lies in knowing who we are and being true to ourselves, no matter what others think.